welcome back to Horrortown today. I've got a bone-chilling true story that will send shivers down your spine. This one takes place in Ukraine during the war, and it's not for the faint of heart. So, gather round, turn off the lights, and get ready for the true horror stories of the Ukraine war. It was the dead of winter in Ukraine, and the snow was falling heavily. A group of soldiers was making their way through the woods, trying to stay hidden from the enemy. They were on a mission to gather intelligence, and the stakes were high. As they trudged through the deep snow, they heard a faint sound in the distance. It was a woman's voice, crying out for help. At first, the soldiers were hesitant to investigate. They knew the enemy was lurking nearby, and it could be a trap. But the cries continued, and they couldn't ignore them. So, they cautiously made their way towards the sound. As they got closer, they could see a figure huddled against a tree, barely visible in the snowstorm. It was a woman, shivering and sobbing uncontrollably. Her clothes were torn, and she had clearly been through a terrible ordeal. The soldiers approached her cautiously, not knowing what to expect. She looked up at them with wide, terrified eyes, and begged for their help. She said that she had been captured by the enemy and held captive for days. She had managed to escape, but was lost and alone in the woods. The soldiers could see that she was in no condition to travel, so they made the decision to take her with them. As they continued on their mission, they tried to keep the woman warm and safe. But the more time they spent with her, the more they realized that something was not right. She would sometimes stare off into space, lost in thought, and when they asked her questions, she would give cryptic answers. One night, as they were huddled together in a makeshift shelter, they heard strange noises outside. It sounded like footsteps in the snow, but when they peeked outside, there was nothing there. The soldiers were on edge, and the woman seemed even more scared than before. As the days went on, strange things continued to happen. The soldiers would hear whispers in the night, or see shadows moving in the trees. They tried to brush it off as paranoia, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. And then, one day, the woman disappeared. The soldiers searched the woods for her, but she was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. They were left with a feeling of unease, wondering what had happened to her and what kind of horrors she had endured. The soldiers continued on their mission, haunted by the memory of the woman who had disappeared. They tried to focus on their task, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, one night, they were ambushed by the enemy. In the chaos of the attack, one of the soldiers was captured. He was taken to a nearby camp and interrogated. And that's when he learned the truth about the woman they had encountered in the woods. She had been a captive of the enemy, but not in the way they had thought. She was a ghost, a spirit that had been haunting those woods for years. The enemy had lured the soldiers there, knowing that they would encounter the ghost and be driven mad with fear. The soldier who had been captured was able to escape, and he returned to his unit with the horrifying news. They were all shaken by the revelation, but they knew they had to continue their mission. They couldn't let the enemy win. But the ghost was not done with them yet. She continued to haunt their every move, whispering in their ears and leaving eerie signs of her presence. The soldiers were on edge, never knowing when she would strike again. One night, as they were huddled together in their shelter, the ghost appeared before them. She was a pale, ethereal figure, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. The soldiers were frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The ghost spoke to them, her voice a haunting whisper. She told them that she had been killed in those woods years ago, during another war. Her spirit had been trapped there ever since, unable to move on. But the soldiers' presence had awakened her, and she was determined to make them suffer. She wanted revenge for the atrocities that had been committed in that place, and she would stop at nothing to get it. The soldiers tried to fight back, but it was no use. The ghost was too powerful, too determined. They were trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. But then, something strange began to happen. The ghost's ethereal form began to flicker, and her voice became distorted. The soldiers watched in awe as the ghost began to fade away, disappearing into the darkness. As they looked around, they saw that the woods had changed. The snow had stopped falling, and the trees were no longer barren and dead. Instead, they were lush and green, filled with life. It was as if the ghost had been released from her torment, and with her departure, the curse that had plagued those woods for years had been lifted. The soldiers were in shock, unsure of what had just happened. But they knew that they had been given a second chance. They had survived the horrors of the Ukraine war, and they could now return home to their loved ones. As they left the woods behind, they knew that they would never forget the horrors they had faced. But they also knew that they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen the power of redemption, and the possibility of finding peace even in the midst of war. And so, they returned home, forever changed by their experience. They would never forget the ghost in the woods, or the strange events that had taken place during their mission. But they also knew that they had been given a gift, the gift of life, and the chance to make a difference in the world. So, dear viewers, that concludes the true horror stories of the Ukraine war. We hope you enjoyed the tale of the ghost in the woods, and that it left you with a sense of awe and wonder. Until next time, stay safe, and don't forget to check under your bed tonight.